Welcome to MarioCast, the piano podcast. I'm your host, Mario O'Hara. It's been a while since I've recorded a podcast, and part of that was due to my move down to my new home here in the wonderful state of Texas. So welcome here to Stephen F. Austin State University. This is the piano lab in which I teach. We have 16 student Yamaha Clavinova CLP pianos, and we also have a Yamaha CVP Clavinova digital piano in which we teach on as well. We run mostly group piano classes for music majors in this particular classroom. These are students who are training to become professional musicians and also professional music educators. In this special back-to-school edition of the piano podcast, I thought I'd share one of the initial lessons that I give to my students in the level 1 group piano classes. So today's episode is entitled Back to the Basics, Major 5-Finger Patterns and Chords. Now, even though this podcast is a beginner's lesson, I am doing this with a couple assumptions in mind. The first assumption is that you are able to identify each key by its respective letter. For example, that you know that this note is C, and that this note is F, and every other white key on the keyboard. You should also know your sharps and flats. You know that this is F sharp or G flat, this is B flat, this is C sharp or D flat, and so forth and so forth. You should also know your finger numbers, both in your left hand and your right hand, that these are the finger number 1s, these are 2s, these are 3s, these are 4s, and these are your 5s. Number 4, although it's probably not required, you should also be able to relate notes on the treble staff and bass staff with what their corresponding keys are on the keyboard. I'll be referring to these a couple times during this podcast. And number 5, finally, it might be beneficial to you to know the following note values, that being a quarter note, half notes, and eighth notes as well. So with that in mind, are you ready to get started? If so, why don't you pull up a keyboard and let's learn some piano here. I was a bit surprised when a couple people who had emailed me or commented on my previous podcast said that they weren't familiar with the terminology of some of the chords that I was discussing in previous podcast episodes, that being like the E-flat major chord or the B-flat minor chord. These type of chords are used so much in Western culture music, both classical music and popular music as well. And in order for you to improve your keyboard skills, you really have to familiarize yourself with this type of terminology. That's one of the goals of this lesson, is that you're able to build up your keyboard vocabulary to the point where you are able to play any major chord or triad that you see on either a lead sheet or in sheet music that you come across. So when I talk about major 5-finger patterns, I'm talking about the first 5 notes of the major scale, that being something like that. And most Western cultured music is based off of a collection of pitches that utilize both half steps and whole steps. Now, the half step is the distance between any 2 adjacent keys, counting the black keys. So if we played a C, a half step above C would be C sharp. And a half step above C sharp would be D. And a half step above D would be D sharp. A half step above D sharp would be E. And then what would be a half step above this E here? Well, if you said F, you would be correct, right? That too is a half step because it's one of the few places that between 2 white keys that doesn't have a black key in between. So we count that as a half step because the pitch relationship is the same thing as it is from the other half steps, such as D sharp to E. So with that in mind, now we're going to define what a whole step is. A whole step is the equivalent to 2 half steps. So, and the whole step is the distance between any 2 keys with 1 in the middle, counting the black keys. So C to D is a whole step. Okay? because there's a C sharp in between it. D to E is a whole step. So what would be a whole step above E? Yeah, it would be F sharp. It would be F sharp because you want to skip over the F because that's a half step. So E to F sharp is a whole step. So if what is a whole step above F sharp? If you said G sharp, you'd be correct because you're skipping over the half step of G and going right to the next black key. Right? So just remember that a half step is two keys adjacent to one another with no key in between, whereas a whole step always has one key in between, counting the black keys, of course. So now that we've defined what a whole step and a half step is, let's apply that knowledge to building our major five-finger patterns. And the easiest major five-finger pattern to know is the C major five-finger pattern. So in your right hand, take your first finger, your thumb, and place it on middle C. And then with your rest of your fingers, play the white keys that follow middle C. So you'll play D, E, F, and G respectively with 2, 3, 4, and 5. So you end up with C, D, E, F, G as your major five-finger pattern. Play it along with me. C, D, E, F, G. Now, are all the notes in the C major five-finger pattern whole steps or half steps or a combination of both? Well, they're a combination of both. If we start on C, what's a whole step above C? Would be D. D to E is a whole step. E to F is a half step, and then F to G is a whole step. So they're all whole steps except between the third and fourth notes of the scale, which are E and F in this particular case. So just remember that all major five-finger patterns, no matter what key you're in, will have all whole steps between the five notes except for between the third and fourth notes of the five-finger pattern. So why don't you play the pattern again with me, both going up and then going back down without repeating the top note. Ready? 1, 2, here we go. Next we're going to play the pattern again, but we're going to leave out the second and the fourth notes of the scale. So we're just going to play 1, 3, 5, and then back to 3 and 1. Okay. So we'll do that half as fast as what we did the major five-finger pattern, so you end up with this. 1, 3, 5, 3, 1. If you're thinking letter names, it would be C, E, G, E, C. Now when we play the pattern of 1, 3, 5, we call that a broken chord or broken triad because it's only 3 different notes. So if we add that to our major five-finger pattern, it goes and there you have your major five-finger pattern plus the major broken chord. Why don't you play that one more time with me? 1, 2, here we go. Now one more element to it that I'd like to add, and instead of playing 1, 3, 5 separately, I want you to play them all at the same time like this. And we call that a block chord since they're played together as a block. Specifically, we call it a C major chord or triad since C is at the bottom of the triad. So why don't you play the whole pattern with me? So if you just play the right hand here, you'll play the C major five-finger pattern with eighth notes, and then you'll play the broken chords with quarter notes, twice as slow as the eighth notes, and then you'll end it with a C major block chord, and it should sound like this. You You can also do this in the left hand, except you'll start on the C below middle C, and instead of starting with your finger number 1, you'll start with your 5th finger, and it should sound like this. So what about doing hands together? Well, you would just play both the C's at the same time, the D's, the E's, the F's, the G's together at the same time. So let's try playing through the whole pattern. That would be the C major 5-finger pattern for 8th notes, and then you'll do the broken chord in quarter notes, and then you'll end it with the block chord. So let me give you a beat. 1, 2, and you can play along with me. 1, 2, ready, play. And that's how you do it. So what if you wanted to transpose this to another key, let's say D major? How would you do it? Well, you would just remember the whole order of whole steps and half steps that you did in the C major 5-finger pattern. Remember, all whole steps except for between the 3rd and 4th notes, and that's where the half step is. So if we wanted to build a D major 5-finger pattern, we would start on D. Whole step above that is E. Whole step above that is F sharp. And then a whole half step, we want a half step between the 3rd and 4th notes. That would be G, and then a whole step above that would be A. Okay, so your D major 5-finger pattern would be D, E, F sharp, G, A. If you hear when I play it without the F sharp, it just doesn't sound the same way, or doesn't sound right. So the broken chord for the D major triad or D major chord would be spelled D, F sharp, A. And when you play them all together, it would be D, F sharp, and A at the same time. So the whole pattern in the right hand would go like this. Or if you want to do it both hands, you could do that. Let me give you a beat first. So now you have 2 major chords added to your vocabulary. You have the C major and the D major. What I would recommend is making a little chart or cheat sheet for yourself, as you can play through all the major 5-finger patterns and chords starting on the white keys. What I'm going to do is I'm going to play through all of them to give you a sense of how they should sound. You can always come back and play this podcast again when you've gotten them solidly practiced and under your fingers. So let me go through all the keys starting on C and then work my way up through B major. Okay, let me give you a beat here. Here's C major, 2, here I go. Go up to D major, 1, 2, here I go. Alright, I'll move up to E major, 2, here I go. F major, ready, and okay, I'll move up to G major, 2, here I go. Okay, A major, 2, here I go. B major, 2, go. And that's it. The next step would be to practice the major 5-finger patterns and chords on all the keys that start on a black key, like C sharp, E flat, F sharp, A flat, and B flat major. And once you've gone through those and feel comfortable with it, you'll be able to play any major triad in root position. That'll do it for this episode of the Piano Podcast. Until next time, hope you keep practicing. Bye.